Experience does not wait for cognition. What do I mean? There's a famous quote by Wilfred Bion where he says, "Thoughts without a thinker." And in this quote, he's describing something very radical about the origins of thinking. Thoughts can exist before the ability or the capacity to think about them. I want to tie this in with our previous video about emotional regulation and emotions. Emotions and emotional experiences can exist before the ability to process them, meaning emotions come first and the ability to be able to think about those experiences develops later. If you think about an infant can feel hunger, terror, longing, fear, but they haven't developed the mental apparatus to solve or to process or to even to consolidate those kinds of experiences. So there you find an experience where there is a thought without a thinker. Hi, I'm Asanda Mati and welcome back to my channel. So in the last video, we spoke about emotional regulation from an IFS perspective, thinking about the different parts that we have within us and how self-leadership can take over, and also how these different parts can tend to eclipse our life or take over our life if we don't understand our emotions and aren't aware of where these emotions are coming from. Today, I want to go a bit deeper, just thinking about that and our emotions. So this theorist that I'm speaking about, Bion, the one who said thoughts without a thinker, thinking about the raw experiences that we experience, as well as our capacity to think about those experiences, he proposed a model. This model includes beta elements and the alpha function. And these together form what he coined containment. So we have beta elements. These are raw, unprocessed emotional or sensory experiences. Then you have the alpha function. This is our capacity to be able to transform these raw, unprocessed emotional and sensory experiences into something that we can think about. When we are born as infants, this is something we rely on heavily from our caregivers, but as we grow older, we need to be able to develop our own internal alpha function, and this helps us to be able to regulate our emotions. Why am I talking about this? Because I want us to really think about how we know how we feel in the moment. This is something that I found a lot of people struggle with. And what you find is that the feelings are there. That's not the struggle. You don't struggle with feeling. You struggle with processing and you struggle with tolerating. So, and even recognizing the feelings. And when people are saying this, they're not saying, I don't know how to feel. It's that in the moment there is a feeling, you're just not sure how to recognize it and how to tolerate it. Yes, there are other people who struggle to feel altogether. Those might be people who fall more on the avoidance side of the spectrum, but for the purposes of this video, I want to talk to you who feels that there is a feeling in a particular moment, but I can't seem to recognize what it is, and I also can't seem to tolerate it. I want to take you back to infancy. So what happens when we are infants is that our caregiver, our mother, will be able to take our distress and notice our distress, metabolize it, and then give it back to us in a digestible way. This is what we call that relationship between beta elements and the alpha function. But as we grow up, like I said, this is a capacity that we develop on our own. But for the infant, this is something very containing, that your parent or your caregiver was able to take what you were feeling, make sense of it for you, and give it back to you in a way that you were able to digest. Now, people who didn't have that experience will find it even extrinsically more hard or incredibly more hard to talk about or to experience and tolerate their feelings, because that model and that template wasn't there when they were growing up. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means it will be a bit harder without that template and without a sense of what it feels like. I want to paint a picture of what kinds of scenarios would create this kind of difficulty. So let's say an infant is crying, and obviously they don't know why they're crying. They just know that they feel discomfort, or they're hungry, or they're itchy. They don't know, but they keep on crying. And a mom, let's say a mom who is anxious, would then become frustrated and say, I've tried everything possible to get you to feel better, now stop crying. So what has happened in that moment? The infant has presented with raw, unprocessed sensory or emotional experiences, and instead of the parent metabolizing that and giving it back to them in a digestible way, the parent has taken on that distress, compounded it with their own distress and their own anxiety, and then given it back to the child in that way. And the child has no capacity to think about it, to digest it in that way. They needed it to be given in a different way. So that becomes uncontaining. And without containment, you find that raw experiences cannot be symbolized. And if you can't symbolize or sit with that raw experience, what happens is that you expel it. So I imagine a lot of us have heard the term projection. This is what happens when someone can't sit with something, that they may project a part of themselves that they have rejected or disavowed onto someone else. So they think someone else is uncaring or mean, whereas they are actually unable to sit with their own anger, right? And they've projected that ugly part, that part that they deem ugly, onto someone else. What also happens is that these parts are then enacted, so they come out in other ways where they shouldn't be coming out, or they are somatized, meaning you carry it in your body if you can't find a way to sit with it and process it. So again, the emotional reality exists, but for some of us, we don't have the apparatus to actually think about it and to symbolize it in a way that makes sense for us. What's interesting, and on a different note, but you can always drop a comment, people seem to think, and different scholars seem to think, that Bion was challenging Rene Descartes' quote that says, I think, therefore I am, or even the proverb scripture that says, as a man thinks, so he is. He was saying that existence comes before the ability to think, whereas the preceding quotes and scripture seem to suggest something differently. So let me know which side of the coin that you fall. Is it existence first and then the ability to think? Because that's what Bion was saying. We first have experiences and we have a raw experience of something, then thinking will form as a result of having something to think about, right? Thinking is something that is formed when we are able to survive frustration. Let me know where you fall. If you're enjoying this video, then it's probably because you're still trying to find the language for what's keeping you emotionally stuck. I've created a free quiz for you to understand and to identify what's keeping you emotionally stuck, what your emotional language and infrastructure looks like, and this will also give you access to resources that will help you get emotionally unstuck. If you would like further information, check out more information below. Let's continue with the video. So let's get back to emotions. Emotions aren't just feelings. They are signals, they are memories, they are relational templates, and they are also stored experiences. So when you feel something in the present, more often than not, you are not just reacting to now. I'm not sure how many of you have experienced this, where on a day, it might be a random day, it might be a difficult day, you find yourself dropping a mug and breaking it, and you start crying unconsolably because you just broke the glass, but you can't imagine that breaking a glass could bring you so much distress, right? And in those moments, what you find is that the emotion that has been triggered has to do with the glass, yes, but might also be taking in from different parts and different experiences that you've had. So often when someone says I'm angry, what they're also saying and what they're also actually feeling is hurt, abandoned, shame, fear. It's not just the one emotion that you're feeling. And this is partly what makes it hard to sit with those feelings and to be able to recognize what you're feeling, because it's normally not just one thing. It's a myriad of different things that might be coming up and might be provoked in a different situation. I want to read a quotation for you. This is from a book called Learning from the Patient, and it's a book written by a psychoanalyst. And he portrays this incident that he had that involved one of his patients. And he says, a patient, Mrs. P, found herself crying in a distraught way after her 4-year-old son had gone to bed. She could not think what had come over her. Her associations to this incident included the fact that her son had been very difficult earlier in the day. He would not do what she asked him. She had told him to go to his room, and when he refused, she had screamed at him. He had then obeyed her, and there was no further trouble. Mrs. P thought that her crying had something to do with this incident, but she wondered why it had upset her so much. It was particularly strange as her son had been quite all right later on. She wondered if it had to do with the fact that he had not been able to settle for the night until she suggested that he get into his father's bed, after which he went straight to bed. It was only then, when she was on her own, that she became extremely upset and started crying inconsolably. So then he gets into a discussion about what he thinks was happening in this moment for Mrs. P. And he says, if we abstract the themes in the sequence, we can see the triggers to the distraught crying more clearly. There was a mother-child relationship, with the child being difficult to handle and the mother screaming. And then later on, there were two people in bed with each other in a comforting and soothing way. And then there was one person left outside crying, and that was the mother. These particular elements, he suggests, are related to particular or earlier experiences that Mrs. P had, which were related to unmanageable childhood experiences that she had. Mrs. P's mother used to scream at her. And when she was difficult to deal with, this is something she experienced, especially after her brother had been born. Eventually, the patient had refused to eat to the point where at the age of 4, her mother had sent her to a home until she recovered her correct weight. The memories evoked by the coming together of these specific earlier memories in the present included that of her brother being allowed to stay with her mother, here represented by the son who was alone with the father, and they were together. The concepts of these help us to see that the patient as a screaming mother evoked in herself an identification with her son as the child being screamed at. Secondly, the excluding relationship was being unconsciously experienced here as equivalent to the present relationship of husband and son. And she remembered how excluded she felt because her mom and her brother got to stay together, whereas she was sent to a home to correct her weight. So you see how emotions can be so complicated. So here you are, you broke a glass and you start crying inconsolably, and you are just looking at the current moments thinking, why would I cry so much over a broken glass? But what happens with emotions, as I was saying, they're not just feelings. They can be signals, they can be memories that are activated through particular triggers. And our responsibility then is to know how to recognize so that we can tolerate them, not just to get rid of them, not just to make them go away, but to really understand what is being activated in this moment and what is it revealing about us and what we may need to deal with, and also what we need to be comforted and to resolve. So recognizing your feelings in the moment is what is called psychological digestion. You are getting to a point where you are developing your own alpha function, your own ability to transform those raw, unprocessed sensory or emotional experiences into something that you can think about, into something that you can tolerate. But this requires patience, and this requires you to really sit with what you are feeling in that moment, and also what has been happening in your life, not just then, but also what time maybe preceding those moments. The thing about your unconscious is that it has no sense of time. So when you experience something and in that moment you're trying to figure out what it is that you're feeling, your brain has already gone way back to see when was the first time you felt something like this. If we can go back to that point, that's what your brain thinks. If we can go back to the point where you felt this emotion for the first time, where you felt abandoned, where you felt rejected, then we can make sense of it because you've survived it before. So you find yourself responding or finding it difficult to be dating someone who's emotionally unavailable and they don't respond to your messages, and you shame yourself for even being affected as much as you are. But what your brain is actually doing is that it's taking you back when you were 7, when your mom left you at your grandmother's house and didn't fetch you. Then that's how your brain processes it, right? So you're not just looking at the fact that your partner didn't respond to your message. Now you're also dealing with the fact that you have felt abandoned and rejected before by a primary caretaker, and that left you feeling so abandoned and so unlovable. And that's what gets activated in that moment. And that's what makes it equally hard to actually know what you're feeling in that moment. But it's not impossible. This is something you can do. And we're going to talk about how we can do that for ourselves now, how we can create and have our own sense of internal alpha function in a way that helps us to feel more contained. Let's make this practical as a way of just bringing it all together. Think about an event or a moment where you felt activated. Now, I want you to separate the event from the actual emotion, right? So this means you'll describe it in a factual way. So instead of running straight to interpreting it, instead of saying they disrespected me, you can say they jumped in or interrupted me while I was speaking. And then before we get to interpreting their behavior, I want you to introspect around how you felt in that moment. Did you felt like you were being sidelined, you were being undermined? Did you feel inferior? Then we start there. Now I want you to go a bit deeper with that initial feeling. That first feeling that came to mind, if that wasn't there, what else could be there? What could be underneath it that might be a bit harder to express? Like I said, with the anger, sometimes anger is easier to express, whereas hurt and shame and fear and disappointment are a bit harder. So you express your anger more quickly because it's easier to access, but that's not all that you are feeling in that particular moment. That anger may just be a primary emotion, but there are deeper emotions, the more vulnerable ones, like we were talking about in our previous video with the exiles, that feel a bit more exposing to get to. Now I want you to think about those feelings. What about that experience activated you so much? What about not being listened to or someone interrupting you when you were speaking felt so unbearable and hard to manage? And then lastly, I want you to sit with that feeling. Don't think about, okay, next time this happens, I want to do this, or jump straight into crisis mode or trying to figure out a solution. Take your phone, put on a 60-second timer and just sit with it. Sit with it and notice how it moves in your body. How are you experiencing it? What physical sensations are coming up? What is it reminding you of? Just for 60 seconds. This is how you learn how to tolerate it. And you find that if you practice this more and more, firstly, you will be able to not jump straight into repeating unhelpful behavior, but also being able to understand yourself will give you more choice. And this is what psychological digestion is all about. You're not trying to get rid of the emotions. You're not trying to expel them as quickly as you can. You're trying to learn how to recognize, because as I said, recognition creates choice so that you don't end up repeating unhelpful behavior. And in this way, you're able to digest what it is that you are feeling in a way that helps you move forward in a more meaningful and thoughtful way. If you found this helpful, be sure to subscribe and comment what resonated with you.